And the new undisputed lightweight champion of the world, Devin the Dream Haney, pitches a shutout against George Kambosos Jr. All that and many more. Let's roll that beautiful bean footage, family.
They hear him. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
Hey, what's up with it, fam? It's Hot Boxing Minute, your favorite pharmaceutical engineer turned boxing analyst, back at you with what? The realness, that uncut, that street corner raw from the gutter as only I know how to bring it to you. Anyways, we got to talk about the earthquake shift magnitude size event that happened out there down under in Marvel Stadium in Australia. George Kambosos Jr. caught that L, the first L of his career, and lost all of his belts against Devin the Dream Haney in a magnificent shutout performance. What can you say? What more can we say about Devin the Dream Haney, folks? He went in there against all odds. Devin the Dream Haney went out there in hostile territory, in a stadium packed with non-friendly Australians, not knowing what the situation was. In theory, he thought his dad wasn't even going to be there in his corner. Confidently went out there, got the job done, and defeated George Kambosos Jr. via a wash on the cards. I had it 118-110. You got to give that man his flowers for that, folks. You got to. Devin the Dream Haney. Love it or hate it, folks. The man is immensely talented. George Kambosos Jr. really had no answers for it. I reluctantly gave George Kambosos Jr. rounds 4 and round 10 in that fight. And both of those rounds that I gave to George Kambosos Jr., I gave with question marks. I'm a firm believer in the jab, folks. And Devin the Dream Haney was feeding that man jabs like Homer Simpson feeds himself donuts. For reals, you have to give that man his flowers. I was seeing a lot of folks online talking about Devin the Dream Haney. Yeah, hold on. My mouth is drying up again. I was seeing a lot of criticisms online about Devin the Dream Haney's performance and him being defensive. That is the sweet science, folks. It is hit and not get hit. There's different styles in boxing. Some people are punchers. Some people are brawlers. Some people are sweet science boxers. Devin the Dream Haney is a sweet science boxer. He stays behind his jab. He's not going to take unnecessary defensive risks. And whether or not people want to give him his credit, he washed George Kambosos Jr. I see no need for a rematch. I really don't. People need to get over their preconceived notions. And when it comes to criticizing Devin the Dream Haney's defensive conscious approach to fighting, I think many people really don't understand how difficult boxing is in the first place. And I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar that most of the people criticizing the way Devin Haney fights have never actually stepped in a ring. They don't know how conceptually difficult it is to throw a punch while moving backwards, or how to stay behind a jab and not get hit when the other person is throwing punches in bunches in rapid fire succession at you. Clearly, they have no conceptual grasp of that. And I don't know how to bridge that gap, folks. I don't know how to tell you that it's a spectacle and an amazing thing to watch, because it is. And George Kambosos Jr., I don't know what the game plan was. I don't know if he thought he was going to go in there and do the same thing that he was going to do against Teofimo Lopez, because clearly that wasn't going to work against Devin the Dream Haney. Devin Haney wasn't going to make the same mistake that Teofimo Lopez was by underestimating George Kambosos Jr. He knew what was in front of him. Devin knew that George was a dangerous opponent and to take him very seriously. Devin Haney is not the kind of guy that will knock a person out and get them out of there quick. That's just not his style. In order to do that, you have to put your feet down into your weight down into your feet, which kind of does affect your mobility. So if you're going to be a knockout artist or you're going to be a hard puncher, you're definitely going to take it out of your mobility. It's going to cost you at the expense of your mobility. That's just what it means to bend down, put your weight into your feet, and throw power into your shots, as opposed to sticking behind your jab, throwing combos, and getting out of the way before return fire comes in. That's the sweet science. It all depends on how you want to approach it. There's different things stylistically. And regardless of what the critics say about Devin the Dream Haney's performance or his style, he still has a lot of great matchups in that 135-pound division. It just doesn't have to be George Kambosos Jr. He's got Ryan Garcia. He's got Isaac Cruz. He's got Gervonta Davis. Maybe Shakur Stevenson moves up. All of those are very marketable and very compelling fights for the fans. So stay tuned for Devin the Dream Haney on what his next move is going to be. You know, in the past, there have been criticisms. You know, there have been fighters like Devin the Dream Haney who have been criticized for their defensive prowess in the past. Guys like Floyd Mayweather Jr., Pernell Whitaker, even further back, Nicolino Loche, Willie Pep. And despite that, those guys all were still winning. And the trick to marketing those type of fighters is to stick them in there with dangerous fighters, or at least people the general public perceives as dangerous. Because as you can see, even with dangerous fighters, when they go up against defensive wizards, they tend to get shut down. All that amazing offense and knockout power tends to get nullified by intelligent defensive management, as in the case of all the aforementioned fighters. And I don't see Devin the Dream Haney really getting stopped anytime soon. Devin the Dream Haney is only 23 years old, folks. At 23 years old, Devin the Dream Haney is the undisputed lightweight world champion. If I'm not mistaken, the first one in the 4-belt era. The last undisputed lightweight champion we had was in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. It was Pernell Whitaker in the 3-belt era. So you got to give it up to Devin the Dream Haney. I'm just all ecstatic about this kid's achievement. The ceiling is super high for Devin. I can't wait to see what he does in the future. Anyways, folks, let's talk about the other big fight that happened. Stephen Fulton Jr., Daniel Roman. Where did they fight at? It was out there. Okay. At the Minneapolis Armory. At the Minneapolis Armory. Good, that's a lot. Minneapolis Armory, Minneapolis. Minneapolis Armory, Minneapolis. Anyways, Stephen Fulton Jr. successfully defeats Daniel Roman in front of a capacity crowd at the Minneapolis Armory in a virtuoso performance. Just like Devin Haney, Stephen Fulton Jr. was using sweet science to clinically outbox Daniel Roman. We have never seen Daniel Roman in a fight like that where he essentially gets nullified. Stephen Fulton Jr. is the truth, folks. Stephen Fulton Jr. can fight frontwards, he can fight backwards, he moves laterally, he can fight on the inside, fight mid-range, fight outside. Stephen Fulton Jr. is a problem in the super bantamweight division, and should he move up, he'll probably be a problem in that junior featherweight division too. Stephen Fulton Jr. is just nice, folks. You got to give it up to that guy. His mastery of the sweet science, that man is a treasure from Philadelphia, folks, for reals. Stephen Fulton Jr. put on a masterclass against Daniel Roman. Shut him down. Shut him down. I was watching the fight. I had to turn it over to go watch the George Kambosos Devin the Dream Haney fight. I think it was round 10. Actually, it was round 11. It just started when I tuned over to watch Kambosos versus Haney, and I didn't see any point, unless Daniel Roman was somehow going to get a lucky knockout. He was washed on the cards. But when I look back, it was a unanimous decision win. Stephen Fulton Jr. might just have a breakout year, folks. He had back-to-back fights with Angelo Leo, Brendan Figueroa, Daniel Roman. All three of those guys are killers. The only person left in that division is an undisputed title fight with MJ Akhmadaliev. He's the guy that has the other 2 belts in the division, and I would actually probably lean in favor of Stephen Fulton Jr. in that fight. Screw it. Stephen Fulton Jr. for undefeated. Man, I totally blew that line, folks. All right, let me state this over again. Stephen Fulton Jr. has been on an impressive run. Back-to-back champions, Angelo Leo, Brandon Figueroa. Now he got the former unified champion, Daniel Roman. He got that win. The only person left is MJ Akhmadaliev for undisputed. Stephen Fulton Jr. for undisputed super bantamweight champion in 2023. I'm going to visualize it, and I'm going to throw it out there right now, folks. I think it's going to happen before the year is over. Cross your fingers. All right. Now that I've given my flowers to that, what else do we talk about? Joe Cordina. Oh, man. If Joe Cordina wasn't on your radar, he should be on your if Joe Cordina wasn't already on your radar, he should be on your radar now. With a right hand, he knocked out Kenichi Ogawa in the second round, out there in front of his own countrymen in Wales, with Joe Calzaghe commentating. What an epic moment for Joe Cordina. Mind you, going into this fight, Joe Cordina was the one many assumed would get knocked out. Kenichi Ogawa is the guy that's pretty famous for having knockout power in his right hand. And many of the boxing pundits were thinking that Joe Cordina might end up getting served. No. Turns out Joe Cordina did the classic feint Roberto Duran move and came over with that right and put Kenichi Ogawa's lights out. There was no recovering from that. Congratulations to Joe Cordina, the new IBF Super Featherweight champion. He's officially on the map. And now Joe Cordina has 2 possible roads after this win against Kenichi Ogawa. Shakur Stevenson or Roger Gutierrez. Both of them are tough outings for him. I can't wait to see either of those matchups. I think those are both going to be potentially fun fights. Anyways, boxing community, what did you think about the fights that you saw yesterday? Goodness, I want your opinions, folks. On the Kambosos Devin Haney fight, I want your opinion on the Stephen Fulton Jr. Daniel Roman fight. And I want your opinion on Joe Cordina and Kenichi Ogawa in the comments section. Hit that like button. Press follow if you haven't already done so, folks. This is Hot Boxing Minute, the future of boxing analysis on YouTube. Peace.